And welcome to the Ascendant Art Podcast, where we are on a search for art that is ascending above mainstream. This is Mike with Catalytic Comics, your host, here with Vinny from Little Chad and Joey from Keeper's Cairn. Good night, guys, or good evening, guys.
That's what happens when you do it live.
Already? That's what happens when we do it live.
Okay, good night.
Daylight savings time screwed up everybody.
Screwed up everyone. I mean, this is exactly how we need to start out of the gate on our second stream here.
You're doing great, Mike. Just bring it on, man. Nobody knows what time it is. Don't worry about it. Time is relative.
Just push through, man.
Just do it again. We'll edit this part out.
No, we won't. But yeah, go ahead. Oh, he muted himself. He's so sad about what his mistake.
I was gonna say, I'm scrambling over here because also I had a stream that was unmuted. I gotta admit, this is the best start to a stream we've had so far.
It's all thanks to you, fearless leader.
That's right. The fearless leader right over the cliff. Well, speaking of fearless leaders, though, this brings into our host and also the great... Good evening, Mrs. H. Glad to see you here. But yes, this brings in, of course, a really great comic we're going to be talking about tonight, and this is Chronicles of Faith, David, who this guy is a true fearless leader. And this was put together by a couple of guys, and one of the ones we have on right now is Brandon Hollingsworth. So good evening, Brandon. How are you?
I'm doing great. I am grappling with being weary from a crazy week last week at NRB, the National Religious Broadcasters, and this lovely time change, which none of us like, and all of us wonder why.
Just like we were talking about during show prep, it would be interesting to be a fly on the wall at the committee where they decided this is totally a great idea. We got to do this daylight savings thing. Let's just make everyone reset their clock. For me as a programmer, that means we got to rewrite all the programs to deal with this one adjustment.
Yvonne and I, who's going to be joining me from Mercy Ways soon. So normally we're on the same time. He's in El Salvador. I'm in Alabama, so we're both Central Time. Everything works great until this time of year, and then all the wheels just completely come off the wagon. It's crazy.
Especially since different countries also have different daylight savings times. I've got a guy I work with in England, and that's the thing. Their daylight savings time is next week. So, but we want to get into some comics, dude. So I know, of course, you work with Brainy Pixel, and then there's also Mercy Ways. So yeah, tell me about those organizations, what you do, and then about Chronicles of Faith.
Yeah, sure. So Brainy Pixel is a Christian animation and production studio. I am blessed to be our chief operations officer, which means I deal with all the day-to-day stuff that nobody else wants to deal with. But I get to also be the chief creation officer. So I get to dream up all the crazy stuff that we get to go do. And I love that part of my job. So we make Christian animation. We make Christian comics. We're working on some Christian games at the moment. So we're hoping to kind of, have this kind of across all of the different media forms that everybody loves. And we also are going to do some live action, some puppet stuff, but we want to create amazing, stunning content for the glory of God and for the entertainment of our viewers across all those mediums. Mercy Ways, who is our partner on this particular project, is a El Salvadorian-based Christian comics company that are world-class. And we are partnered together on this particular project called Chronicles of Faith, David, which we've got an Indiegogo going right now. Where we're raising production funds, hopefully for issue 2. And we've already produced issue 0, which is a 24-page full-color comic with no ads, and issue 1, which is exclusive to the Indiegogo right now, which is a 36 full-color page comic with no ads. And we're super stoked to be talking about all of that.
I was going to say we had a chance to, skim through those a little bit. And I know one thing that was quite interesting about that to me is also just the different ways that you can tell that story. And this is one thing I wanted to get into. So there's 2 ways we can look at this. One is there's obviously a very clear Christian message, biblical message here. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. But also I want to look at this just in a pure entertainment sense, because this is one thing I found kind of interesting, having especially a lot of connections to the Chinese student community, that over in Asian media, there is a lot of historically themed content, content themed around ancient China, or in the case of the Japanese, ancient Japan. And there's some great dramatic content there. And the thing is, for people who have actually read through the Old Testament, there's just some great drama.
Yeah.
And David, his story is definitely one of them.
Yeah, so I agree. Absolutely, Mike. And you're really hitting on the root of the entire series here. And, for instance, read the book of Judges. It reads like, Game of Thrones, right? So it's amazing stuff there. And that's not all the books of the Bible are that way. But you're really, again, hitting on the root of Chronicles of Faith, the series. The reason why it's called Chronicles of Faith, and really the reason for creating the series, was because when you read the book of Chronicles, which was actually chronologically the last book written in the Old Testament, it is a reminder. It's a call to the people of Israel who were coming out of their years in Babylon to remember the Pentateuch, right? To look back at the first 5 books of the Bible and remember all of the amazing things that God had done through Genesis and Exodus and all of those early books, right? And it was kind of like the original reboot, right? We're all about reboots these days in media. Well, Chronicles was kind of like the original reboot. It was the author telling people, the people of Israel, to look back at all that God has done, see how much he cares for you, see how much he loves you, see these amazing provisions he has made for you when you are obedient and you can trust in him. It was a clear call to remember and then trust, right? It's a 2-part thing. And that's really our goal with the Chronicles of Faith series, is to remind people that God is faithful, that he is a good God, he loves his children, and that we can trust in him. Because then our hope is that once we trust, we can write our own chronicle of faith in our own life.
Yes, indeed. And I know one interesting thing too is also when you go back and you look at the books of Chronicles, in the case of David, Book of Samuel, something that was also quite unique about the biblical text compared to a number of other historical texts around the time is that many kings did not want negative history written. And yet, if you look at the story of Saul, he messes up, and like it writes explicitly, like Samuel says, like, no, you failed, you've torn away, you're going to lose the kingdom. And he does. You see with David, right? He also had committed some of his own sins and weaknesses, and you see the penalty and the cost of that. And that's something, what's funny is even you see the problem today, like I said, just from a story perspective, there are a lot of people like they don't want to see the main character fail. And yet what makes it great reading and also so inspirational over literally thousands of years is the fact that there were times that he did fail, but he had to pick himself up. He had to seek redemption. He had to do all these things.
And that was really what you're talking about, Mike, is really one of the key reasons why we chose David's story as our first story in this series, because hopefully we want to produce Chronicles of Faith for David and Samson and Jesus and Peter and Paul and, lots and lots of people, not just not being a real person who did all these amazing things, right? He was a king, he was a warrior, but he was also a fallible man. And when he failed, that's really was the ultimate expression of why he was called a man after God's own heart. Because when he broke 7 of the 10 commandments, in the span of just a couple of weeks, with this tremendous moral failure, it was his reaction to that marks him as a man after God's own heart. He repented for what he had done and then accepted what God sent to him in terms of punishment. So that's one of the reasons that we want to tell this story. And we want to tell the whole story. We're going to tell it in a family-friendly way, but we're not going to omit parts of David's story, because it's that story of God using normal people in extraordinary ways that is so critical to the Bible. And what you're also talking about, Mike, is that, this predilection of the Jewish people to record all the history, not just the history that makes them sound good or come out smelling good like a flower, but all of history is really an apologetics for those folks out there that don't believe God's word is true. Well, if you were going to make this stuff up, you'd edit all that stuff out, right? Because that just makes you look silly, or it makes you look bad. It makes you look like you don't know what you're doing.
When you're in the Old Testament, there's a whole lot of, hey, we did this, God didn't like it, slap the shit out of us for it. And then, and then the rest of the time it reads like a tech manual. They're like, we're going to build this whole thing, and like it's got to have this many grams of silver, and it's got to have these angels carved out of this gold that's facing this direction at all times. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how do people read this?
Yeah. And it's because that the people in those stories are not the main characters, right? The main character is God, right? And so it makes sense then that, we're going to have people that are fallible because people are fallible, and we're okay with showing all the warts.
There was a friend of mine, like he was an Old Testament scholar, and he gave me one interesting example there in which this was, I'm trying to remember which book this is. I think it was Chronicles, where King Hezekiah was being sieged by Sennacherib. What the historians say is the official history now is that there was a plague of rats that basically spread the bubonic plague and like killed just a huge number, like basically wiped out their army in 2 days. They found Sennacherib's version of the same history, and what's funny is like it shows it right up to the moment of like, I've got Hezekiah trapped like a bird in a cage, like this guy's not going anywhere, it's over, and then it just ends.
Yeah.
And that's where you got to pick up from the Old Testament version, which then says he went back, and people are like, hey, what happened, dude?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there are so many little things like that. That's just awesome. And as you study the word and you study the history around the word, you study the archaeology, it's so cool to see those things emerge. And we did. We deep dove all those elements for this story. I mean, the Bible is first and foremost our source material, and we love the Bible. We love the word of God. And we study it as a part of this, and we pray over it as a part of the process of creating this comic. But we also dive into the Talmud. We also dive into, Jewish history and culture, sources about David, because he's a national hero to the Jews and in the nation of Israel. And so we deep dove on all those topics, and we pull out little things like, what did the armor of the Philistines kind of really look like, based on pillars and plinths that were carved at that time. And oh, by the way, the people of Israel aren't going to be running around swinging swords, because there were only 3 swords, in the nation of Israel at that time. They used spears because they didn't have the metallurgy, the knowledge of metallurgy. So you're not.
I think they also had a version of gun control too. Like the Philistines had imposed a sort of gun control, except in this case it was sword control.
Absolutely, because a sword was a very, very valuable thing, and it was a very powerful thing. So all those little historical elements we pull into the storytelling of this story. We don't make it, center stage, but you begin to get a feel for the culture, a feel for the time. You begin to understand the biblical context around the story, which is so key to telling any good story, right? You've got to have a great setting. You've got to explain it in a way to your reader or to your viewer where they don't feel like they're being preached at or preached to.
Yeah, so we've talked a couple times on the podcast previously about one of our impressions from some of the Christian pop culture that came around in the 90s, and how one of the biggest problems was that it was kind of the production values were cheap, and it kind of discouraged, it gave things a bad reputation, right? The people have a bad taste in their mouth for Christian storytelling, because I think there was a lot of it that was done without very good production value, without commitment to doing a good product. People thought, we're just going to be able to put Bible on the cover of a comic or a book, and we don't need to put the effort into making a product that's going to speak to people who like comic books, right? So you're making a comic book. If you're making a comic book, you need to make sure that the art is actually a high quality tier of artwork, that it has a comic book style to it so that people like it. And I love that what you're doing, and when you're talking about like investigating so that it's got historical accurate in terms of the production, like basically production design.
Yeah,
because I do feel like you look at things like what was it, the Left Behind movies and some of that stuff that was done that had a fairly big push within the Christian community, at least when I was younger.
I remember those books.
Yeah, and those books were huge, because the books were able, it's a book, you're able to paint a picture and spend a lot of pages on it. When they tried to translate it into a different story medium like film, they cut the budgets. Maybe that's all they could do to get it to happen, but it suffered because of it. And I think that for 20 years, people who have been trying to get movies with Christian themes off the ground have been fighting that bad taste that was left by that stuff. And I think that I like that what you're doing. And I bring that up, it's kind of a long tangent, but because I do want to point out that the main thing that people, I think, always bring up to me whenever I talk about that is just they have a feeling and a memory of it being cheap and not entertaining to the level that they're used to.
I could not agree more. And we combat that every day. And it's our thought that someone has to be the first, right? Someone has to turn that tide and go, no, I'm going to step out on faith, and I'm going to put what this story is worth in terms of production value. And we're talking about dollars and cents here. We'll be real. We're going to put what this story is worth into this story, and I'm going to try and turn that tide by showing the world that no, Christians can produce top quality art. Christians can produce top quality story. We can bring the best in terms of marketing, because our God is worth it. Both Brainy Pixel and Mercy Ways, we look at everything we produce first and foremost as an offering to God. And if you read Genesis 4, you find out what happens when you don't bring your best offering to God, right?
And for those who don't remember, this is the story of Cain and Abel, in which Cain didn't bring as good of an offering, and that led to a lot of bad things.
Right, a lot of bad things.
There's a little bit of an illusion. They don't specifically say he didn't bring his best offering. They say he laid with sin. It's very up in the air exactly what he did, but the one thing that is kind of known is he fucked up.
Yeah, he didn't bring his first fruits.
And now I've also got another question along with this too. And it's kind of funny. So we have like a sort of running joke on this show. We call it Not Safe for Baptists. So this is a reference to, if we do like a content warning on here with certain creators, we put up that label as kind of a joke. But it also made me think about too, there's also, when we talk about Christian media, religious media, there is this kind of a subtext that it's also needs to be family friendly. In other words, like it has to be G or PG rated. And I'm curious what your take is on that part of it, because again, if we go back, and especially like certain parts of Old and New Testament, if we read
oh my god, those things are hard R. I worked at the movie theater. I told you, under the MPAA guidelines, David's story is a hard R. I mean, we've got sex, violence. It's definitely an R-rated story.
Yeah, but then
and also looked at a lot of the stories in the Bible, like Ezekiel, that's a horror movie. Like, a whole bunch of dead people just stand up in the middle of the desert and march on conquest. That's Army of Darkness. If you look at God himself and the way he's presented in the book, very Lovecraftian. I mean, it's a voice you hear inside your head most of the times that no one else can hear.
Yes, and then also further too, like we talk about that part, but then also we look into Christian history, because remember in high school, one book that was really influential on me was the book Jesus Freaks, which was put out by Voice of the Martyrs. You read that one, or you read Tortured for Christ, like life is hard, right? And so this is, I think, one of the kind of interesting questions. You're looking to produce stuff specifically in this context. How do you balance or manage that expectation? Like, do you think it's possible to go beyond what we call like kid-friendly stuff? And if so, like, what do you think is the appropriate way to do that? Because at the same time, I do understand that there's a need to also not do like what a lot of the secular world does and says, oh, like just use sex and violence as the selling point, instead of just saying, well, that's just part of the reality of what we really want to tell.
So absolutely, I agree with what you guys are saying. And the Old Testament is full of some hard R or worse stuff. You know, when you're beheading priests and killing them and sacrificing them on their very altars, that's pretty hardcore.
Didn't some woman use a tent spike to stab a guy through his skull?
That was an escaping
his
king.
Temple. Yeah, that was jail. Yeah, absolutely.
Book of Judges.
She's actually she's in the Book of Judges, and she's in the Hall of Heroes, but in Hebrews. But so the way you approach this is the way you approach any story. If you're telling it for a mass media market, once you have the idea for the story, you got to define who is the audience for this story. So, for instance, Chronicles of Faith is for boys and girls 7 to 11, primarily boys. And so you have to then, everything after that decision drives your decisions in production, right? The style that you're going to use, the colors that you're going to use, the writing style has to be at a certain level. You can't write at a college level for a 7-year-old kid. And Brainy Pixel is not scared of those things. As a matter of fact, my magnum opus and the show I want to most see made is, I pitch it as a Christian Hellboy called Tenant's Tales. And you can go to our website and see some stuff there. And it's very much on the hard R end of things, because I think there's a place for those sorts of stories, right? Not for 7 and 11-year-olds, but when you get to be my age, right? Or maybe you're even, a little younger than me, young, high school, maybe going into college age. I think most people are ready for those sorts of ideas and those sorts of concepts. And you can reach those people using those sorts of stories and that sort of imagery and that sort of environment, but you can still deliver light and truth. The fine balance that you have to kind of navigate is not glorifying sin, not saying that sin is anything that is attractive. You can show sin, but you show it in a way that it has negative consequences, because sin does have negative consequences, and that the light wins in the end, and that there is a redeeming moment to the story. And all of say, for instance, the Tenant Tales that I've written, and produced are that way. There are monsters, there's violence, there's people getting shot and stabbed. But there's a moment where things shift and we realize what's really going on. It's a part of a bigger story where goodness and light has a place, and that place is triumphant. When I pitch the show, the way I pitch it is, those moments in the vampire movies when you have the priest and he holds his cross up to repel the vampire, and he's holding the cross, and then the vampire just laughs, and then the cross catches on fire, and the priest, is immolated. He catches on fire and he's killed. Well, in my world, he pulls the cross out and it catches on fire. Then he throws it down and says, "That's okay. I didn't need that anyway. In the name of Jesus, be dispelled." And then the vampire is blown away. I want to tell stories where the light wins, because that's what happens at the end of the book.
Bring up a really probably cheesy movie, Dracula 2000, that a lot of people may not have watched, but it was funny because Jared Butler was in it as Dracula, before he became 300 famous. The twist on it was that Dracula was actually Judas Iscariot. And if you look at all the things that hurt Dracula in the modern lore, silver. Because, so that's why he was punished by, like, the reason he's Dracula is because he was punished by God to not be allowed to find peace in death. And, so he had to, wander, and he became a demon on earth because of his betrayal. So that's why silver hurt him. That's why the cross, hurt him. And now it was poorly executed as a movie, but we talk about wanting to maybe make a good movie first that also maybe gives that message across. How many people who might not have been non-believers left that movie now knowing Judas Iscariot, 50, the silver? I mean, they probably got, because they, if they were avoiding the Bible their whole life, they may have gotten more from that to get some of that story, because they thought they were just going to see a Dracula movie.
Right. Absolutely. And again, each of our properties is different, right? The ones that we're working on and the ones that Mercy Ways are all working on. Mercy Ways is actually working on a Tenet Tales comic for us right now called Salt and Blood. And so you have to understand who your audience is and what is the message that you're trying to deliver to that audience. And that really defines the delivery method.
Because I know, of course, we're talking about, of course, this reference back to, right, the 90s and that particular milieu. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, too, about, as soon as you mentioned, like, considering the audience, I know a couple of times on this podcast, of course, we'll talk about the progressive left and, like, the direction they've taken a lot of storytelling in Hollywood and how that's kind of gone off the rails. I think there's also has been kind of a progressive right as well. And how I think both of them actually express is this idea of, like, we're going to say it's for everybody, but in reality, like, you have to, like, meet these conditions ahead of time, and you have to like it because we tell you have to like it. One thing I'm curious about there is, do you ever run into that kind of person in the creative space, and how do you handle it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we were last week, we were at NRB, the National Religious Broadcasters Conference, which is the largest collection of purveyors and producers and prolificators of Christian media on the planet. And yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, I pitched Tenet Tales to people last week, and they're like, you can't have shows like that. That's, that's heretical or whatever. So yeah, so absolutely. And you have them on both sides of the street. And again, it's when people are more interested in the almighty dollar than they are the almighty God. God very clearly has used stories from the get-go to communicate his messages to people. His son, when he was here on earth incarnate, that was his primary teaching tool. And God wants us to be creative. He is the ultimate creator, and he has made us to be creative beings. And so what we see at Brainy Pixel and at Mercy Ways, and not just us, there are lots of other Christian creators in the industry right now that underscore or point out messages and truths that we find in Scripture. It's not about being preachy, right? It's about being teachy, for lack of a better term. We want to show you that there is truth out there to be found, and these stories can lead you to them. Just like if it's Jesus telling a story about using your talents, right? Or is it Brandon telling a story about a fallen angel who can't lie? It's the delivery method is variable, but it works just the same as it did 2,000 years ago.
Well, and I think the stories don't necessarily lead you there, but they're always designed to put you on a path. It's still up to you to go to whatever the destination is.
Absolutely.
It puts you on that path.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's kind of the beauty of it. Like, I am sure 5 different people could read the same passage in the Bible and get a different good message out of it.
Sure. Yeah, it's the living word. I've read the same passage at different times in my life and gotten different messages. The word changes in response to what's going on in your heart at that point. I'm not saying that our stories do that, because our stories are not obviously the living word of God, but stories they can unlock your mind, they can broaden your horizons, they can introduce thoughts to you that you would have never maybe run across other than that. And that's really the job of a good story, is to make you think and make you ask questions and make you maybe go do some digging on your own and figure some things out, or talk to somebody about it. I mean, those are the stories that we all love, right? We watched Spider-Man No Way Home and everybody wants to talk about it. When you saw him do this, what did that make you feel like? Or it made me feel this way.
And I would tell somebody, the people who you're running into is like, you think that if C.S. Lewis was around now and it wasn't out before, and he was pitching you on the Chronicles of Narnia,
right?
These same people would probably be like, it's not clear enough. You're not going to help anybody. When the Chronicles of Narnia has been better for Christian messaging than probably any pop culture item in the last 100 years, in terms of just getting people to be able to internalize the actual root ideas that will make you possibly more agreeable to the Christian message as a whole.
Yeah, or can you imagine?
I think the average human being gets symbolism a lot better than the intelligentsia in media allows them to believe.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine going to a far right-wing Christian production studio and pitching something like Screw Tape Letters? I'm going to have these letters back and forth between these demons, right? And it's going to expose truth of the Bible. Yeah, it's not going to fly. So you've got to think outside the box, and you've got to really go with the story, that God has placed in your heart.
When you're talking about this tenant pitch you were working on, funny enough, like, I have a similar story kind of in the can, off on the side, waiting to be written, about a half demon who basically is supposed to protect the second coming of Christ from the demons, commits every sin in doing so, and rationalizes it by saying, well, the end justifies the means.
Right.
Falls into complete corruption, goes to commit suicide, and like, these are all things that you wouldn't think a hero would do. But they send a very powerful message throughout the course of the story. And I won't tell you exactly how it ends, but I like happy endings too. And I like the light to win. So,
and I know also, like, for Petro Patriot, when I started working on the world building for how that works as well, that's one of the things I started thinking about for the cosmology of that world. Right. At what point do we, is there ever a point I hit with the world building that it'll start to run contrary, right? Right, contrary to theology, and what is it and what goes off the rails there, or in what cases is that if there's anything that looks magical, does it reinforce the story I really want to tell? I brought up like Star Storyteller here, and I think it's actually a good topic to talk about, is like, how do we make those decisions?
Yeah, you've got to be really, really careful, absolutely, because you don't want to create anything that runs contrary to Scripture. And we found this particularly challenging because our story in issue 1, we begin to pull the camera back and expand, our view of David and the people that are touching David, right? In terms of his story touches King Saul, his story touches Samuel, but it also touches the Philistines. And so we all know where this story is leading. If you've read the Bible, there's a big confrontation that's now ubiquitous in our world of the little guy versus the big guy. But when we're talking about things in the Philistine camp, again, we want to be careful never to glorify sin. We want to be careful to never make the bad guys seem heroic, right? We don't want to, have them all cast with, twirly black mustaches or anything like that. But we also never want to tip over into that world where darkness becomes attractive, or darkness becomes something that we yearn for or we desire to be a part of. And it's just about careful storytelling. You just got to make sure you're crafting the right message and you're keeping true to your North Star and what you're trying to do.
When you say that, what comes to my mind, one of the things that I think of is Harry Potter, right? I look at Universal Studios and it's a license to print money, because people who were young kids when that came out became so engrossed in that world that they spend time, effort, money, everything to maintain their connection to this fictional universe. And if you want to talk about what Harry Potter lifted a lot for its storytelling, there is so much that J.K. Rowling lifted in terms of Bible themes and aesthetics that it's, I mean, by the time you get to the Deathly Hallows, it's just ridiculous. It might as well just be called, like the Resurrection, right? So
right.
And when I remember distinctly how huge Harry Potter was at the time, and there were lots of communities that were going after it. And I remember arguing with people, is like, you have a great point about wanting to get people into a good thing, but don't push this way. Maybe you look at it and you use, I would say, what I've said this to people, use Harry Potter effectively as a gateway drug to Christianity. Instead of letting them get sucked into the world of Harry Potter for the rest of their adult lives, talk about what it is within the themes that J.K. Rowling lifted from the Bible and put into Harry Potter that are the universal truths that are speaking to you. And then maybe use, maybe make some content or bring people in that way, instead of, because when you start putting down like the content that they've fallen in love with, you're going to push them away and they're not going to want it. Whereas if you say, and you don't have to embrace the parts of it that are anti-theology, you just talk about, one of the things you really like about Harry is about how he's sacrificing himself for his whole world, so to speak, and has to come back. And in his resurrection is able to defeat the bad. Who else did that? And then, I always wondered why we weren't using that as a transition point. The hardest thing is getting kids interested in it.
Yeah.
Well, you've got something that got them interested in those ideas, and then you turn them away instead of trying to pull them in to the, right content and right message. And it's just something that bothered me. I know that some people genuinely feel if you engage in anything of that nature, you're kind of going against the values. I feel differently, and I think there's room for that, for that to be an opportunity, because I look at the stories in the Bible of where Jesus went, like you said, he used storytelling to spread his messages. He went into communities that had very specifically rejected, the teachings that he was trying to do. Hate the sin, love the sinner. Like, you want to save the person, use it as an opportunity. And I've seen this kind of stuff again and again in storytelling. The Bible is always, if you look at it, I look at Man of Steel with Zack Snyder. That is a Christ story.
I absolutely agree. And what you're really talking about is universal themes, right? As a writer, you begin to very quickly understand what these universal themes are and what the sources are, and you're talking about a savior, right? A savior character. You're talking about resurrection moments and things of that nature. These are things that are common in every story. And I honestly think these are echoes of God's law that he puts in our heart that comes out through the creative process. And I absolutely agree. And the worst thing you can do as a father of 5, I can tell you, is tell a kid, this is bad, don't read this. That's exactly what they're going to do. So
no, as a fellow father of 5, I can tell you the best thing to do is go, this is bad, this is what's in there. If you want to read it, you're welcome to, but here are the reasons why I would rather you didn't. And then move on.
What's funny is the same, when we talk to, there's people in the community who will, when it comes to storytelling and entertainment, take the approach you're talking about. Like, there's this evil, don't ever look at it. I've also found that some of these same people, as firearms owners, will say, well, one of the things you have to do is demystify it at a young age. You have to make it a part of their, upbringing, so that they're not trying to be attracted. I was like, don't you see how these are kind of the same thing? It's just one's a physical item and one's an idea.
This goes into something we often do as a theme on our podcast, in which we say, beautiful art is true.
This is not a theme we do. You do this, Mike, and I love it, so keep doing it, but it's your thing.
Okay, fine. But I will continue to hammer that until it is a theme we all do.
It's yours.
Yeah. The best art is truthful. It inspires within you feelings of, when you see something that just resonates as honest. Like, we always talk about authenticity in storytelling, and authenticity is honesty. Honesty is truth. Universal truth comes from God.
And I know, especially, I think it's in one of the major prophets' teaching, it talks about differentiating between the holy and the profane. And when we mentioned the Harry Potter example, I think this is a good part. It's like, okay, which parts of this are beautiful and inspiring, and why are those parts good, and versus the parts that are kind of like silly or just kind of add-ons. And then you begin to see it's like, look, like I'm not in this because like they made this overly complicated game of lacrosse that with flying. I'm in this because of like this very heroic story of
the Harry Potter stands are gonna nail you on not knowing the name of Quidditch, by the way. It's
Quidditch.
Hey,
I know Quidditch.
All right.
I
that's right. We're not allowed to say it because J.K. Rowling's been
ever.
canceled now.
So. That's right. But I'm just making the allusion because like I remember watching some of the films and of course like seeing the stadium and all that. Like those kind of things are fun. But like what really made some of those movies great are the idea of you're the underdog or you're the person who's not liked at the school, but like you're going to come out on top. You have this existential threat and you've got to solve the puzzle and crack the code or else like the whole world's in trouble.
And let's bring that back to David, right? He's the original underdog hero, right? I mean, you're talking about the youngest of 8 brothers, right? And he's the guy that is picked to fight this giant that all the trained military armies of Israel are backing down from, right? So yeah, I mean, these themes are they're echoing, right, the truths that we find in Scripture. And like I said, some of these themes are ubiquitous. You can go anywhere in the world and talk about David versus Goliath, and they might have never seen a Bible, but they know what you're talking about. They know the story. So why are we as Christians shying away from telling those stories? We shouldn't be. We should be embracing those stories and telling them in a way that's new and inventive and exciting and beautiful and engaging, because we've got to capture, the hearts and minds of our youth, right? Because we've got to let them know there's something in that book, right, that's worth exploring. And that's what we're trying to do.
No, absolutely. And I think also too, like this goes into the issue with production values as well. I can think of a couple of films, and one of them in particular was Fireproof, that I remember like after watching that particular film, the concept actually has a lot of potential to be a really good dramatic story. But there were a couple of times where I could actually see that from the people in the background, they're like, okay, like we're not willing to let this guy go where we need him to go. We're not going to take certain conflicts in certain directions. We have to like really like hit people over the head on a particular theme, whereas I think like there were a couple of key components that if they had changed them, it would have been a very excellent movie. And a few of these have to do with there were just a couple of inconsistencies with his character for how he behaved. And then also there was a little bit of, if you look at the way he interacts with his wife, it's almost like he was the one who was insufficient and he's just trying to prove himself. Whereas I think you could have actually come up with a pretty good dynamic with both of those characters where they're both sinners. They both need kind of repentance and one comes to the other. I know we occasionally do these like rewrite episodes. And I know one of them we did was this like very terrible comic called Mother of Madness. And we had fun just like completely rewriting that story. I'll have to come back. We'll have to do like a breakdown of that particular film, get into the weeds on it. But I can think of that one. I can think of a few other ones that people attempted to do that, you're right, if we don't have the right creative production, if we don't have the right storytelling, it doesn't work. Now, with that in mind, I think there are some Christian and Christian-themed films that have worked very well. I'm sure you remember Passion of the Christ when it came out.
I worked at the theater still then, and I can tell you that thing was legit like sold out for the entire weekend. It was crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I love that film. I try to watch that film a couple times a year just to check myself, to really confront the reality of the crucifixion and of the passion. Because I think for me, now for my wife, for instance, like she gets scared when she hears the music for an advertisement for a horror movie. So for that type of person, that's really not a film she needs to go see, right? She would not sleep for probably 3 months. But for me, a guy who loves horror films, who, writes about fallen angels and things like that, that's absolutely in my wheelhouse.
What other horror films do you like? What are your inspirations?
So I am actually, I'm a big horror fan, and have been for years. And that's actually one of my convictions, is that after I was saved, God began convicting me over horror films. I would say one of the most recent one, and the name is escaping me. It was on Netflix. The Ritual is probably one of my most favorite horror films that I've seen. I don't really go in for the stuff that goes deep into demonic or or spiritual things, because I think they kind of cross the line usually, and they begin to glorify evil and they don't glorify light, which is what I'm all about. But things where, there's just ooky and spooky, I generally like that kind of stuff. I want to make Christian horror films one day.
Did you ever watch The Ring or The Grudge?
I actually did. I've got a great story about The Grudge. I'll have to come back on the podcast and tell you guys sometime.
I was going to say, man,
what are you talking about?
The Ring?
We got plenty of time.
We got 10 minutes, but I was going to say, because for The Ring, I remember when I watched that movie, I could not sleep that night.
I took the TV out of my bedroom.
All right, so I'll tell you the Grudge story right quick. So I was actually I was working in the defense space and was in Boston working with iRobot, believe it or not, before they started making Roombas and all that stuff on a job. I was in Boston by myself, and The Grudge had just come out and it was in theaters. And I'm like, this is great. I'm by myself. I don't have to really check with my wife or my kids to go see a movie. I can just go and enjoy it. And so I got off work one Friday night. I was staying over the weekend because I was going to be there again on Monday. And I went to the theater. It was late. It's probably about 8 o'clock because I'd grabbed some dinner. So I was catching the later show and watched The Grudge. And there's this, for the most part, I was okay. But there's this one scene where the girl pulls up the covers and looks down, and you get this POV where she's looking down under the covers and something happens, right? I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but that one scene.
It's such an old movie.
Well, there's this thing under the covers, and it kind of reaches up and makes the Grudge noise, right?
Oh, the sound.
Yes, and remember the sound. The sound's really important here. So it makes that sound and reaches up, and it kind of, the way it was shot and just the kind of the quick brevity of it it freaked me out, right? It just really just got to me. Get done watching the film. I'm leaving the film, and again, I'm in Boston. I'm by myself. I don't really know anybody. I'm just here for work. And so I come out of the theater, and it's a Boston winter night, and the snow is falling. It's been snowing while I was in the theater. And, you have the halogen lights, and it's exactly like a horror movie. Everything is pitch black, one little light, and the snow is falling. Everything is deep and quiet. And so I rush to my car, and I get in my car, and I crank it up, and I start driving back. And I'm going down these little bitty roads in Boston. It's rural Boston, and so all these trees are over the road, and the snow is coming across. And I called my best friend, and it was late. And I call my best friend, and he's laughing at me, right? Because we went to high school together. And I'm like, dude, you got to stay on the phone with me. I'm going to die. Something's going to get me. I'm freaked out. I'm scared. And so he's laughing, but he's talking to me. And so I get back to the hotel, park in the parking lot, and run like a little girl all the way to the front door. And then the front door opens up, and then I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm okay. I'm just kind of, how's it going, Mr. Behind the desk guy. And so then I get on the elevator, right? I'm all by myself, and the door opens up, and there's a long hallway with lights and dark. And of course, my room is the farthest one, at the far end of the room, far end of the hall. So I run again like a little girl all the way down the hallway, get to my room, put the key in, open the door. And then as I go into the room, the door hinge makes that noise. I'm not joking. It makes the Grudge noise. It goes, and I scream, and I jump to the bed, and I get under the covers. And I
That's the last place it's going to be now.
And I call my friend, and he laughs at me again. And he talks me down because I'm freaked out, right? And so finally I go to sleep. And the next morning, part of what I did was I trained people on some software that we designed. And so the next morning I had a training class. And so I go in, and I'm still a little bit jittery. I'm getting my coffee, I'm getting set up, and I'm projecting my screen, up on the room. Nobody's in the room. And so I get an email from my friend, and he says, hey, I know you had a rough night last night. I just want to send you this video to calm you down because I know you got a big training today. I'm like, man, what a friend, right?
I think we all know where this is going.
By this point, people are coming in, they're getting their coffee, and I'm sitting there. I'm the teacher. And so I open up this attachment, and this beautiful video opens up. It's this bucolic, landscape, and this car driving through this beautiful landscape and this beautiful.
I think I've seen this video.
And then all of a sudden, this thing goes, wow! It jumps up on the screen, and I scream like I've never screamed in my life. I fall out of my chair onto the floor. People in the room are looking at me like, what is wrong with you? And they're laughing at me. So there you go. That's my Grudge story. So
there you go. And now it's funny as when you talk about that, I used to do ghost house tours. It was Woodruff Sky Reservation, and Woodruff is named after Robert W. Woodruff, the guy who basically made Coca-Cola what it is. Now, Asa Chandler invented Coke, but Woodruff was the marketing guy who got it all over the world. What I've been told is that this ghost house was actually his hunting lodge. But we, of course, created this whole story around it. But the thing was, I just remember it's in the Appalachian Mountains. It's all these like wild rhododendron trees, like all these twisted trees at night. And of course, like that was right when the LED technology came out. And even though the lights weren't that good, the fact that you could run the light all night and not like 2 hours on the batteries, like that was good. So we used those. So it's like twisted trees, monochromatic dim light. That just made for so many great experiences.
That makes it so much worse. Yeah,
I had a similar thing happen to you actually when I watched The Ring. It was I was actually living with a guy that I was in the Navy with, and we were roommates, right? And I was between places, and I was living with him for a couple of months while I got back on my feet after kind of a rough divorce. But we watched The Ring, and The Ring really got me, and I think it was The Ring 2, because The Ring 1, I remember I took a TV out of my room for, so it must have been The Ring 2, but it was The Ring 2, and
Did you ever see the first Poltergeist movie?
Oh, yeah.
You remember at the end when they get to the hotel and he just like rips the TV out and throws it out of the hotel room?
I mean, that's great. I didn't do that because I paid good money for the TV, but I took it into the living room, and I put a blanket over top of it, because apparently I wasn't
Why
sure
would a blanket stop
it
a
and
demon
putting-
girl from like who's climbing out of a well and traveling through a television? I mean, I mean, that's where I have the problem with this logic. Like, oh, I'm gonna put a
well, maybe
blanket
she
on
can't
the
see the portal then. She can't see the portal out of the TV.
At the end of the movie, my phone starts ringing, and the number is blocked, and I answer it anyway, knowing that there's some bullshit going on. And another one of my friends, then when I go, hello, another one of my friends goes, 7 days. And I'm like, screw all of you. I hate you. I'm going to bed.
Yeah. Chad, it's because obviously demon girls that live in wells are afraid of cotton. That's why they can't crawl through the blanket.
It is the look, the feel of cotton, the fabric of our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I do think a good point that we can pull out of all this, though, and it ties back into some of the other things.
Just don't watch horror movies alone.
Right.
At night. I can tell you, I did that with The Ring, the first Ring, because I had to screen it. I was working as a projectionist, and so you had to actually check the prints before you make them public. So I'm watching that thing. I get out of that movie at like 2 a.m. because you watch them after you do your normal shift and you got paid for it. So it was a nice gig. And so I'm driving, like you're talking about, like Brainy. I was like getting in my car, and it's like 2 a.m. So it's about as dark as it gets. And I drive, and my parents had just moved, so they were in a development that didn't have a lot of street lights, and there was lots of woods. And I was like, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die in the road. It's like it was like eerily quiet. I lived in a fairly, I went from a fairly urban place. You go out to the woods, and then the sound just dies, and I'm like, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die.
I think the point
was the wild dog.
To me, the woods feel better than like an empty street at night. Like I feel safe in the woods, but if I'm walking down a dark street, I get all kinds of.
No, but if you remember the first Ring movie, they have those like landscape establishing shots where it's like through the woods and everything. It's like, nope, I'm in one of those shots right now. This is bad.
Yeah, no, and this is where I wanted to get to my point, though. Just like for creation, when you paint a painting, right, like you'll have certain brush strokes, you have certain colors that you use to construct your painting. Well, and just like you mentioned for David, it's like, well, for a certain age of kid, even like right down to the color scheme, you do sometimes want brighter colors to like give that attention. Well, I think also with storytelling, you can create a palette of storytelling elements. And in fact, I know in architecture, there's an architecture book on this called A Pattern Language, in which, for example, like when we say the word door, even though we've seen many, many different kinds of doors, like the word automatically tells you more or less like what dimensions it should be, what it's supposed to do, where you would find it in the building. And I think that's the case too with storytelling elements, that like you watch a horror film and you go outside. Well, the thing is, because it's fresh in your mind, its palette of ideas on how to make sense of the world around it is drawing on what you just observed. And I do think you're like, that is part of like what is important for us then as creators is what are we putting into that idea bank?
And what are we inspiring, right? For someone who reads that or watches that, what are the imagery and what are the colors and what are the banks that we're instilling in their mind, right? Are those things that glorify God, that draw us closer to God, or they glorify sin and draw us closer to darkness, right? And that's, you got to make sure that when you're telling that story, when you're crafting it, that it's placing seeds in the mind of your viewer or your reader that are going to push them towards things of light as opposed to darkness. So yeah, you're spot on, Mike.
Yeah. And I do see, I'm looking at the clock here, we're coming up on the hour. So,
well, I think we should make sure we figure out where we can get these products that are so amazing that we all want now.
We would love for folks to go over and check it out. Definitely check out the perks and everything that we've got there. We've got some really good ones, and we'd love for you to check those out. If you're interested in just the comic, we would advise at least the $10 level, because then you're going to get both issue 0 and issue 1, plus a lot of other amazing perks as well. If you want to kind of get engaged more with the comic, I personally like the 105 level, because if you back us at that level, you're actually going to be able to be a character in the next issue. You get to choose whether you're going to be an Israelite or a Philistine, and we're going to draw your likeness into the comic. And all of our levels, they stack. So if you go down to that 105 level, you're going to get probably about 80 things, right? You're going to get all the other stuff at all the other levels.
And when you mentioned that too, I know one thing I got confused about because I was asking about it on the chat. I actually didn't know what the tiers were. Like all I saw was like, oh, $10, $25.
Yeah, actually, that's a problem with Indiegogo. I emailed them.
You had to click on it.
Yeah, you do. You have to click on it. But actually, most Indiegogos are automatically expanded. But there's for some reason, a problem with ours, and they don't know why it is. I know why it is. Anyway, but they're not auto expanded for some reason. So so just click on those levels and they'll expand.
Yes. And then also I've got the Brainy Pixel website up, and I know also, the Twitter handle is Brainy Pixel. I follow you guys, and you've got a lot of different titles out there, I saw.
We do. We've got a ton of stuff on our website. And we also have a curated Christian store over at brainypixel.com/shop, where we've actually worked with other Christian creators in the comic and story realm. And we actually have their content on our store, because we're trying to raise, we're trying to be a high tide that raises all boats. We want to expose people to these stellar storytellers and artists that are out there, because there are so many of them that are working hard, creating wonderful content, but nobody knows about them. So now that we're being blessed with a little more exposure, we want other people to find out not just about our stuff, but about their stuff as well. And we do, again, animation and Mercy Ways as well. They've got other products on their website. They were an award-winning comic studio before we got involved with them. They had a 12-issue run called Fear Not that won the best Christian product in Germany. So yeah, they're amazing as well. So we're not just one-trick ponies. So definitely check us out, and please do support us if you can on the Indiegogo. And if you can't, pray for us. And if you can't do that, at least share what we're doing to others.
All right, that sounds great. We'll kind of switch over to free play.